Douglas was very excited. He was looking forward to spending a weekend together with his wife, Nancy. It was their first weekend getaway after their wedding, and they were looking forward to all the fun, relaxing things they would be doing there all weekend long. Douglas had some general ideas about all the stuff they were going to do, but somehow, fighting and running for their lives had never even crossed their minds. The young couple settled in at the bed and breakfast they had rented for the weekend. They spent the night resting as they had reached the place late that night. The next day found them getting ready to go into town for breakfast. Soon, they were out and about around the town. While getting some croissants and coffee from a local cafe, they felt the people staring at them and whispering to each other clearly about them. That was very confusing and concerning, considering, as far as they knew, there was nothing about them gossip-worthy. Douglas chalked it up to being the fresh meat in town. People were just checking out the new guests. That thought also did not seem very reassuring. But that bubble also burst when a group of women asked to join them at their table. Puzzled, they agreed, and then began a tale that everyone in the town knew, apparently. A story everyone was afraid of. It was practically a legend by now. It was told in every gathering, with some variations in hushed whispers. It was how Douglas and Nancy came across the story of Patrick. In the year 1988, a 17-year-old Patrick was a high school student. He was studious, a bit athletic, but was he popular? No, he was not. In fact, he was one of the most bullied people in the school. He didn't know when or how exactly it started, but one day he came back home just fine, and the next day he realized how much of an outcast he had become when he found out about the whole class having a party without him. That was back when he was in 6th standard. Now, in his senior year, it had become much more than just ignorance. He had been actively bullied for so long now, he had become a recluse. Why, you ask? Because he had a speech impairment. Everyone always made fun of his stutter. They mocked him in the hallways when they saw him walking by. They whispered, pointed, giggled, and booed at him whenever they heard him talk, either in class or outside. So to save himself from humiliation, Patrick avoided any gatherings of people where he could encounter such behavior. Most of the time he wasn't even invited, so he never went to any parties or events if it could be helped. Even if there were open events he could go to, he never did because he wasn't confident enough to do so. And then there was Chad, his worst bully. He was the one who had started it all. He was the one who had that first party where he invited everyone but Patrick. He seemed to have a personal vendetta against Patrick, trying to make his life a living hell. Mocking and teasing was the least he did. He would physically abuse him along with the emotional torture. A hit here or punch there was nothing. Over the years, the constant bullying and torture had made Patrick suffer some really bad low self-esteem issues. He had also started suffering from severe anxiety and panic attacks. Some of his anxiety episodes had even happened around the kids in class. That just gave the kids even more ammunition to hurt him even more. So the cycle continued. Now they kept trying to make him have panic attacks or anxiety attacks on purpose. Just the other day, during a gym class, the other kids had deliberately locked Patrick out of the locker room with only his towel on. He had felt really humiliated at the whole ordeal. He had just stayed there knocking and pleading while the other kids just stood around watching and laughing. It went on for quite a time until their teacher came around and solved the issue. Patrick had grown up with all this. It barely fazed him anymore. Sometimes he did wish that things could change, that he could live without constant torture, that he could spend his whole day without trying to hide in nooks and crannies in an effort to escape his bullies. He wished that he could live a normal life of a normal teenager, make friends, date, get a girlfriend, and all that, but his social life had taken a downward dump, and all that had turned impossible. No one wanted to associate with the school outcast. No one but Nick, that is. Nick, his classmate, his earliest friend, was the only one that stayed with him throughout the years. He was the only one that didn't leave Patrick at the earliest signs of trouble. Every other friend he had was long gone, not wanting to become an outcast just by mere association with Patrick, but Nick didn't care at all. He stuck with Patrick through thick and thin, and never worried about his reputation taking a dive for the worse. Patrick admired his resolve. He admired him in many other things too, for his ability to maintain good grades and a steady girlfriend. And that admiration of his had brought him to this situation, where he was seriously thinking of going to a party for the first time in years. Their classmate Randy was throwing a party for a basketball match win their school had scored. It was open to all, everyone who wanted to come to the party. Nick was trying to convince Patrick to come to the party. He always did, but Patrick never agreed. He didn't want to become the object of ridicule in the party, but Nick was adamant. He wanted Patrick to experience at least one party in their senior year, considering it was just about to end anyway. And even though Patrick had always denied wanting to go to any party, deep down, he wanted to. Of course he wanted to. He was desperate for any semblance of normalcy. So this time, he caved. He was going to go to the party. Anne and James considered themselves quite lucky in life. They had good jobs, were settled nicely, had a steady income going, and they had each other. And most of all, they had a nice, brilliant son. Someone they were so proud of, Patrick. Anne had him with her first husband, who passed away soon after his birth. So she considered Patrick to be her late husband's greatest gift to her. And so did James, her new husband, Patrick's stepfather. Even though Patrick was his stepson, James loved him like a real father anyway. He had seen him grow from a scruffy preteen to an adolescent, so Anne and James really considered themselves lucky. They had a brilliant son who, even though he was struggling in a lot of ways, had never really given up. His speech impairment had never stopped him from succeeding, and succeed he did. Now, a 17-year-old Patrick had just discovered that he had picked up a full-ride scholarship for graphic engineering at Ohio University. All the years of hard work and dedication had finally paid off for Patrick. His mother and stepfather were so proud of his achievement. They celebrated their son's first scholarship over a fancy dinner in a nice restaurant in town. Yes, they were proud of him, but they were also scared and worried for him. They had seen how this one small disability had turned his life really bad. They didn't want this trend to continue on in college, too. They wanted their son to have a relatively normal experience and the social life of a regular teen. They had tried talking to him about opening up, about standing up for himself, but all for naught. Except maybe it wasn't all useless after all. Their son was going to a party. Patrick was going to a party. After all this time, Mike had made him agree after all. Patrick was still hesitant over going to the party. Even on the night of the party, Mike had spent hours over the phone trying to convince Patrick to continue on with the party and to stand up for himself for once. So Patrick got strength in himself, and he definitely needed and started to get ready. He stared in the mirror as he fixed his glasses and adjusted his bow tie. His mother had brought him his whole ensemble, and he looked quite dapper in it. His mother stood in the doorway as she watched her son, excited and full of life and so long, right before her eyes. Telling him he looked perfect already, she urged him to get on with the process. So he got ready and decided to go downstairs to finally head to the party. His stepfather met him at the bottom of the stairs and smiled mischievously when he asked Patrick to close his eyes and take his hand out. And when Patrick did so, he handed him the keys to his priceless Chevy Chevelle. Full of excitement, Patrick hugged his stepfather and grabbed the keys and raced out the door, thanking his parents as he pulled out of the driveway. It was going to be a different night. He could practically feel it in his bones. Patrick was feeling nervous, slowly driving by the house, checking out all the students from the school hanging on the front porch, drinking and laughing. He was very hesitant on going to the party, but he was glad he had picked up Mike and had brought him along. He encouraged him to park around the block and take it step by step. They could just walk to the house. They walked into the house as someone handed them cups of beer and thanked them for coming. Patrick began sipping as he walked throughout the house, checking out the paintings on the wall. He was feeling the rush of the smooth drink going down his throat and the loud banging music in his every fiber. He had never felt this excited or even this alive. He thanked Mike for convincing him to come to the party. Mike just smiled and winked at him, telling him that that's what friends were for. They were just passing through the hallway, talking and laughing, when they came across a group of boys, and all of them stopped dead in their tracks. "Oh, look who decided to bring his pet along to the party," one of them, John, taunted, coming over towards us. "I didn't know dogs were allowed in here. I would have brought mine." Tony joined in on the teasing, bumping into Mike deliberately and throwing his drink on him. By then, the hallway had become crowded. Everyone had come out to see the commotion happening right there. Most of them joined in on the jeering and teasing. Overcome with his anxiety and fear, all Patrick could hear was white noise. Everything around him seemed to be happening in slow motion, and nothing made sense. He could feel the movements and touches along his body, but it all felt like he was having an out-of-body experience, frozen on the spot. When he came back to his senses, Patrick was horrified at the scene in front of him. And by the looks of it, Mike was equally shocked at the happenings of the event. He was just standing there with his pants down to his knees, some liquid running down his shirt and no drinks in his hands. Everyone was pointing, jeering, and laughing their asses off. Patrick felt a humiliation so intense he saw black. The tears of shame had started gathering in his eyes. Mike punched the person next to him, knocking him through the glass table as Patrick grabbed a beer and smashed it on the other and exited the house, almost running out of there. Mike chased after him right on his heels. Bursting out of the house, he cursed the time they had decided to park their car away from the home. Patrick just wanted to leave as soon as possible. He hurried towards the street end where his car was parked, muttering and cursing in anger. Mike was equally as angry, cursing up a storm as well. By the time they had reached the car, Patrick was beside himself with anger and humiliation, and that anger was taken out on the race pedal of the car. In his anger, he was speeding way beyond the speed limit. Mike was getting worried in the passenger seat. He tried to talk Patrick into slowing down. His anger had dissipated a bit on seeing everything passing by them in a blur. He then realized how dangerous everything could prove for them, but Patrick was not listening to him and showed no signs of slowing down. He tried to grab onto the steering wheel, trying to calm Patrick down, but Patrick snatched his arm angrily. His anger had turned towards Mike too, cursing him for making him go to that party, for being the cause of all of this. Mike knew that he was so angry he wouldn't take his words to heart. His immediate concern was Patrick, who had stopped ranting now and had started to sway a little bit. He was clearly feeling dizzy. Soon he began to complain that his head was pounding and he couldn't even keep his eyes open. Mike didn't know how to tackle the situation as it happened so suddenly. One minute they were talking, and in the next, Patrick had fallen unconscious and slumped over the steering wheel. Mike tried to grab the wheel, trying to gain control as they smashed into a tree. The front of the car caught fire, and as Mike looked up, he saw Patrick's body lying in the ditch just before he passed out. That was the last thing he remembered of the night. Mike woke up in the hospital with no recollection of what happened after and how he got there. 2 officers from the authorities came as soon as they heard that he had woken up. They asked him some questions about the accident and about Patrick's body. That's when he realized Patrick hadn't been found yet. That was a shocking revelation. He told them everything he remembered about the night, and on that basis, 3 students were arrested for spiking Patrick's beer at the party. A search party was sent to try and find Patrick's body, alive or not. But even after a week of continuous search, no signs of Patrick came up. The sheriff decided to call off the search and rescue and declared him deceased. Mike was devastated at the news. Not only had he lost his best friend, he was also suffering from the survivor's guilt. Patrick's parents were inconsolable at their loss, especially his mother. She took a great load of stress, leading her health to decline. His stepfather worried even more for her. So to bring her back to life again, he realized that he had to take her away from there so she wouldn't have to constantly live with past memories. So he sold the house and they moved away. And now, in 2005, their old house had been turned into a bed and breakfast. A bed and breakfast where Douglas and Nancy were currently staying. Douglas was quite honestly amazed at people's ability to make such fantastical tales that had no grain of truth in them. Sure, he could believe the story of Patrick dying or being missing, but the story got even weirder. Those women were saying something so absurd it couldn't be real. According to them, every year before summer break, Patrick's disfigured body would approach his old house, banging on the door after midnight and hoping someone would answer. And heaven forbid, if anyone answered the door, Patrick would drag them into the woods and they would never be seen again. He had finished off many people till this day, including his bullies and their families. Totally absurd, insisted Douglas. His wife Nancy, however, was a bit more perturbed. But as the time passed by and they kept on exploring the small town, they eventually forgot about it and didn't remember until 2 days later. They were lying in bed, sleeping, when they were rudely awoken by the loud banging on the door. Someone was outside. They hurriedly got up, staring at each other, questions in their eyes. Douglas stood up to answer the door. Nancy told him not to, but he braved the consequences and went to open the door. The banging did not stop, even when he said out loud that he was coming. On his way, he stopped at the kitchen island and picked up a butcher's knife for protection, just in case. He cracked open the door a little bit to see who it was, when a mangled and rotten hand came right through the crack. They screamed. Jumping back and pushing the hand away, they closed the door shut again. The young wedding couple turned their horrified eyes towards each other. The stories were true, after all. The banging had resumed. They turned towards a window to see what exactly was outside. So not just the hand, the whole body was damaged, mangled from so many areas and rotting away. The zombie thing had realized they were at the window and dashed towards the couple, grunting. They tried moving away, but the zombie grabbed onto Nancy's hair through the window and tried to pull her through. She screamed in pain and terror. Douglas got the butcher knife and stabbed the zombie in the side of the face. It started howling and grunting. This gave Nancy and her husband Douglas time to lock all the doors and windows in the house. By the time they were done, the zombie had gone back to the door trying to break it open. And by the looks of it, he would succeed in doing so soon. So they had to think of a way, fast, to get out of there alive. Just when the zombie snatched the butcher knife from his face and broke down the door, Nancy recalled the basement door of the house that opened in the back. They rushed over to it as fast as they could, evading the zombie body that had now entered the house. They hurriedly escaped through the basement as they could hear the zombie wandering through the house searching for them. Just when they thought they were about to leave the area, Douglas was struck with an idea. Now that he knew that Patrick was real, he didn't want it to kill any more people. So he took the torch bottle that was left there for emergency purposes, and as soon as they were a safe distance away, he threw it into the window and watched as the house caught on fire. Soon, the whole house was engulfed in flames, along with the corpse of Patrick. The town was now free of his terror.
Yeah!